You know, there's nothing wrong with stretching. Good old-fashioned stretching makes a difference. The reason conventional methods of stretching don't seem to have a long-lasting effect is because after stretching, and I think you probably have experienced this too, there's a window of opportunity. There's about 30 minutes of greater extensibility that you have. And if you don't exploit and use that extensibility, then you default back to your previous operational platform. So if you have a really weak core, then one of the ways you compensate is to increase the tightness and tone in your hamstrings. Well, the point is, the minute you appreciate a warm-up effect and a lengthening of your hamstrings, if we don't do a drill that also makes you be a little bit quicker and a little bit more stable in your core, your brain has no option but to default back to tight hamstrings, because I've got to keep your pelvis somewhat level when you walk. And if your abs won't do it, believe it or not, biomechanically your hamstrings will try. They're not in the most advantageous position to do so. But in the absence of any other help, they will. And that's how we were designed to survive. Compensation is always an option for survival, but it's not an optimal way to train or reinforce that. So what I would say is, you know, the efforts at flexibility, if they make what I call a response is a temporary change and an adaptation is a long-standing change. If your stretching is at least effective enough to make a response, an appreciable temporary change, then immediately follow that up with a usage. And here's one thing I tell people. If you're the person who doesn't have a lot of hamstring or hip mobility, and you then do something to improve that, I absolutely love variations of deadlifting. Number one, if I roll a 3-year-old a medicine ball, they're not going to squat it, and they're not going to go down in a split stance and get it. They're going to deadlift that thing if they want to pick it up. So believe it or not, both for young clients, older clients, poorly trained clients, the deadlift is an amazing option because it's a very primitive form of lifting. It reinforces core stability and makes you exploit your hip mobility. And secondly, it doesn't load the shoulders in an awkward position, and the increased tension you get with deadlifting is really good for juicing a hormonal response and creating better bone density in older people. So, you know, I've told people, get the hamstring mobility acceptable. You know, and it's laying flat on your back and lifting one leg to 75, 80 degrees while the other leg remains flat. That's acceptable. Get both legs symmetrical. Bend over and pick something up, and then do it with a little bit of guidance without changing your back position. And let's say you can't get something like a kettlebell that's placed between your ankles off the floor without rounding your back. Then for God's sakes, lift the kettlebell, but don't make it lighter and round your back to get to it. I would rather you see lift a respectably heavy weight with a range of motion assistance than to make it light and do it wrong. And I think that's where a lot of trainers, you know, have inadvertently maybe made a little bit of a mistake, and it's a forgivable mistake. But when somebody has poor form, don't go light. Assume that they don't have adequate capacity to do it. And in something like a deadlift, doing it in a partial range of motion is not a disadvantage, whereas I think partial squats could largely distort your authentic motor program. A partial deadlift does not load your joints unnecessarily, but it loads your soft tissue quite well. So the advice for the person at home is do your flexibility, and there's great flexibility information out there, but when you get it, use it before you lose it. You got about a 30-minute window, and we actually designed a DVD called Kettlebells from the Ground Up that explores a 300-year-old exercise called the Turkish Getup. It is both a DVD, a 2-DVD set, and a manual that's designed both for the exercise professional and the home user. We give a little extra information for the exercise pro, and in the manual it's printed in red. But any person could load that DVD, grab a moderate to light kettlebell, turn on their TV set, and actually every position the Turkish Getup gives them a challenge in,
Mm-hmm.
they can default to 3 corrective maneuvers that both improve their mobility and juice their stability. And, you know, I sort of loosely say, I think that exercise like the Turkish Getup, that's as old as it is, over 300 years from our research,
Yeah.
was probably not introduced as an exercise. It was probably introduced as a screen by old world coaches and strongmen, and said, if you can't do this,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't do it equally on each side, then I will not teach you to lift heavy things. And
Sure.
that's the definition of a screen.